Hello everyone, today I'm taking you on a tour of the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum, which is located in Almonte, Ontario. Let's go check it out. Between 1840 and 1870, woolen manufacturing emerged as a major Canadian industry. Mills were built in areas such as the Mississippi Valley, where water power, labor, and wool supplies were abundant. James Rosamount built mills at Carleton Place in Almonte in the 1840s and 1850s. His sons, Bennett and William, began this much larger mill in 1866 in partnership with George Stephen of Montreal. For the next 40 years, it was one of the largest, most progressive mills in Canada. The main buildings, nearly flat roof, stair tower, and fenestration, are characteristic of late 19th century textile mills in Canada. In 1862, Bennett Rosamount inherited the Rosamount Woolen Company. In his presidency, he made his factories more efficient, secured government contracts, thereby creating stability in Almonte. These changes marked the end of the first stage of growth and the beginning of the second stage of growth and development. This period will be one of the most successful times in the mill's history. Alright, so first we're going to head into the Nora Rosamond Hughes Gallery on the first floor. Alright, so next we're going to go upstairs to the Mary Lettner Textile Research Center and the Wool Hall Gallery. The Rosamond Bell. This bell was created from a melted down cannon used by Charles Rosamond, who fought for the South. It reads Rosamond Woolen Company 11,901, recast from bell made by B&W Rosamond and Company 1867. Punctuality was taken very seriously at the number 1 mill factory. The large bell originally used to hang in the factory's tower. It rang 4 times each morning to call employees to work. The 20th century was a very difficult time for the Canadian woolen industry. The booming war years were followed by crippling recessions, and by the 1950s, many Canadian mills could no longer compete with foreign products. Few mill complexes remain in Ontario to tell the story of the woolen manufacturing industry. Important factories in Montreal, Trois-Rivières, Cornwall, Hamilton, and Cambridge have all burnt down or been demolished. The Rosamond No. 1 woolen mill was the last mill in Almonte in operation until the ownership of Colley Woolen Mills. However, after 120 years, its doors were closed in 1987. Mississippi Mills has protected and takes pride in its architectural heritage. Its mills remain an iconic part of the landscape, having been converted into condominiums, stores, businesses, and museums. All of these medals were won by the Rosamond Woolen Company at various exhibitions. These international exhibitions were important to many companies since they were an excellent platform to promote and improve trade and sales. So you've got the silver medal, Dominion of Canyon medal, and a bronze medal. Though industrialized woolen manufacturing slowly disappeared from the Lanark region, the people of this area continue to be actively involved in textiles. Several groups operate within the area, making yarn, clothing, accessories, decor, and artwork. Many weavers, crafters, and spinners are also eager to share their knowledge and talents with the public and volunteer with the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum to demonstrate how wool is processed today, woven and used today. Pinking shear machine. Pinking shear blades are notched or zigzagged. They provide decorative edge to fabric and prevent fraying. This custom-built pinking shear machine was used for making samples for books of Kenwood blankets. The squares were approximately 1.5 to 2 inches in size. In order to dye the wool certain shades, the powdered dyes had to be mixed into a solution of water with either acetate acid and/or sulfuric acid to achieve the desired color. These chemical bottles would have utilized and stored for use in the dye house. This scoop was utilized in the Rosamond No. 1 mill dye house. Books like this provided the woolen mill with information and calculations to achieve the desired color for their woolen products. Each color on the shade card comes with recommended calculations for each color. The fulling ball was used to establish a shrinking number for each type of wool produced at the Rosamond mill. Depending on the end use of the wool, it was important to know how each wool type would shrink during processing. Approximately 21% of woolen textile workers of the 1870s were children, some as young as 9. Many families relied on the small wages their children brought in to make ends meet. Children were suited for mill work because their small bodies could crawl under machines to clean the floors, fix broken threads, and catch bobbins. They also cost less to the employers in terms of wages. The Ontario Factories Act of 1884 forbade boys under 12 years of age and girls under 14 from working in mills. It also limited the working hours of women and youth to a maximum of 10 hours a day. Though enforcement was initially lax, statistics show that child labor did decrease in Ontario after the legislation came into effect. This is an example of an early industrial loom made in England. Imported into Canada to weave Harris tweed cloth, this loom is foot-powered, has 4 harnesses and a manually operated shuttle. A metal dobby chain would have controlled the pattern. This device was designed to provide information on yard count. This yarn count specifies the size of yarn by measuring diameter as well as its density. The yarn balancer. A yarn balancer is a device used to determine the yardage of a particular yarn by weighing an evenly balanced length of yarn. The yardage can be determined by measuring the length and multiplying by 100. Have you ever accidentally shrunk wool in the washing machine? The result is called fulling and was often done on purpose in the mills to make cloth tighter and fluffier. Afterwards, it was run through a napper, which was used on rotating spiky burrs to raise the wool fibers for a soft finish. The tessel burr used on this style of napper came from Europe and was prepared and mounted on the small steel rolls, which in turn were mounted onto the large cylinder in the napper. Kenwood mills use this machine for demonstration purposes. C&K loom. In a cam loom, the cam controls the motion of the harnesses. This loom is a mechanically driven 92-inch cam loom with fly shuttles and 4 harnesses. McGregor, Gourley and Company in Galt, Ontario built this loom in the 1900s. In the 1880s, the Rosemont Woolen Company's mill had 80 looms operating at once. Weaving transforms loose yarn into cloth by interlacing them on a machine called a loom. These were originally hand-operated and powered by foot. Power looms automated weaving and sped up the process considerably, though workers were still needed to watch the machines in case of broken threads and to fill shuttles. 2 sets of yarn are required to weave a cloth, warp and weft. Warp yarns are held tight by the loom. Weft yarn is one long, continuous strand running horizontal that is passed over and under the warp threads by a shuttle. Can you spot a weave pattern on your clothes? The cone winder. Some of the yarn made at the Rosemont No. 1 mill was used in the Almonte Knitting Company mill, also known as the Rosemonts. Yarn destined for factory knitting was wound into hollow wooden or cardboard supports called cones. This machine was used to wind skins of dyed and dried yarns onto a paper cone. The yarn could then be used for normal production. Huck Canada Limited in Arnprior used this machine to wind yarns used in the production of paper maker's felt. The cop winder. Spun yarn was wound over itself on a driven steel spindle to produce a yarn package called a cop. Cops were longer, narrow packages of yarn that were wound around a steel spindle and then placed in a wooden shuttle on the loom for weaving. They could reach lengths of up to 45 feet. Carded wool must be spun to create a fiber strong enough to use in the manufacturing process. The process of spinning twists the fibers around themselves, making them into a strong yarn suitable for weaving. There are 3 steps in spinning. Stretching makes the wool thin and even, twisting strengthens the wool into yarn, and winding the yarn on spindles and bobbins. Spinning was traditionally carried out using various techniques and equipment such as hand-operated drop spindles until the invention of industrial machinery in the 18th century. These new inventions, such as the water frame, spinning jenny, and spinning mule, were developed to make spinning more efficient. The bobbin winder, early 1900s. To prepare for weaving really large bolts of cloth, several spools or bobbins were wound together to form a much longer yarn. Machines like this bobbin winder were operated by hand, though later this process was mechanized. The yarn twister. Mill workers used a yarn twisting machine like this one in front of you to twist spindles of spun yarn together to create multi-ply yarn. This made it strong enough to be woven into fabric. This specialty yarn twister, made in Worcester, Massachusetts, and donated by Huck Canada in Arnprior, Ontario. It is estimated that 1/6 of 19th century Mississippi Valley residents worked in the textile trade. Sometimes whole families worked in the mills. While employment in the mills did provide income, the work itself was very difficult. Labor conditions were characterized by strict discipline, long hours, low pay, and often unsafe working conditions. The large bell in this exhibition once hung in the Rosamond Woolen Company mill tower and summoned people to work early morning for 7 a.m. Late workers found the gate locked and were docked pay. Until the 1930s, when a 50-hour work week was adopted, mill employees labored for 12 hours each day with only one 45-minute lunch break. When business was good, workers were kept overtime with no additional pay. When business was slow, workers were frequently laid off. The mixing picker, early 1900s. A mixing picker opens the wool fiber to produce a continuous compressed sheet suitable for carding machines. The fleece is fed into the back where it picks apart by the teeth and squished flat by the rollers. This machine is a 10 horsepower, 6 bar, 24-inch wide mixing picker. It was built in the early 1900s and formerly used in the J. Watchorn Woolen Mill in Marrickville, Ontario. Wool fresh from the sheep is dirty, smelly, and greasy. Scouring is an essential process in the preparation of wool for spinning, whether for worsted or for woolen yarns. Mill workers would wash the sorted wool in a large scouring machine with hot water and detergent. The process would soften mill workers' hands because of the lanolin from the fleece. After drying, the wool was run through a picker, which removed vegetable matter and loose debris. The picker machine opened up the wool, similarly to pulling it apart with your fingers. Blade shears. Before the invention of the sheep shearing machine, shearers had to remove the fleece from the sheep using blade shears. When done properly, fleece came off in one neat sheet and was rolled into a compact bundle. The rolled fleece was then ready to be sent to the wool sorters. Hand carders. Hand carders were used exclusively prior to the invention of the carding machine. Like the carding machines, they untangled and straightened the wool fibers for the spinning twisting process. The sheep shearing machines were introduced to the industry in the late 1800s and greatly sped up the shearing process. They worked just like the clippers in a barber shop. This early model required 2 men to operate, 1 to turn the crank and 1 to work on the sheep. What is wool? Wool is a natural fiber that comes from sheep. The quality of the wool fiber is determined by its fineness, diameter, staple length, crimp, waviness, strength, and color. These can vary depending on the breed of the sheep, where on the sheep the fibers are taken, and where the sheep are raised. Wool is one of the most versatile textile materials because it has elasticity. Its fibers have scales that interlock when spun, making them thin yet strong. Its felting ability makes wool cloth thicker and warmer. Wool's natural coloring means it can be dyed easily, and it can be lightweight suit material on thick, cozy flannel, depending on how it is processed. Ram, on permanent loan from the Canadian Wool Growers Association, the last of its extinct breed of sheep from Cape Breton. This ram has an unusual past. He was on display at the 1901 Pan American Exposition when President McKinley was assassinated. Legend has it that 29-year-old Leon Sugolsey leant against this case while aiming the fatal shot at the president. Wool harvesting is still an annual event on farms. Farmers shear all the wool from a sheep in a single piece, called a fleece. Sweat, dirt, and a natural animal grease called lanolin helps keep the fleece stay intact. Once the fleece is removed, it is classed. The wool is categorized into grades according to its strength, crimp, and color. The dirtiest and coarsest wool is removed and packed separately. The wools are then tightly packed into bales, each containing about 60 fleeces. Bales are then marked with the farmer's brand number and grade identification. This is how wool would have arrived at the mills, purchased at an auction or through an agent and ready to be worked.
I'm doing some research.
I know that my neighbor volunteers in an Alabama, the West Union store there. It's Clayton.
I also put it in with the National Day Collective at Ottawa, so I'm waiting for that.
Stuffed animals with the books and just like nice little neat corners and everything. That's for the kids.
This bench is in honor of the first trustees, directors of the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum. Without their foresight, we would not have the great museum we have today. Thank you. All right, thank you everyone for watching this tour of the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum in Almonte, Ontario. I will leave a link in the description if you want to learn more about this museum. If you enjoy content about Ontario and things to do in Ontario, events, etc., give this video a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more of this type of content. Thank you. Bye-bye.